I'm Jason Ludden at the University of Nevada, Reno, and we are interviewing speakers who will be attending our conference responding to Naomi Klein's new book on climate change and capitalism causes this changes everything. So Dr. Ceccarelli, thank you so much for joining us today through all the snafus of technology.
Sure.
To get things started, I guess I was wondering if you could explain how you became interested in the discipline of biology or science more generally as an area of rhetorical inquiry.
Well, I actually started out as a scientist. When I was an undergraduate, I was a biology major. And somewhere during my undergraduate program, I discovered rhetoric and found my true calling. So I ended up doing a double major in rhetoric and biology. And from there, it just made sense when I went on to graduate school to study rhetoric, to study rhetoric of science. The area of research was really just coming into being around that time when I started graduate school. So the Kairos was perfect for me.
Has your approach towards the rhetoric of science changed over the years from the time when you started entering the field to now?
Yeah, I think so. I think when I first started out, I did what a lot of people did in those early years, which was to study the internal rhetoric of science. That is, how scientists seek to persuade other scientists. That was, in those early years, that was the hard case, right? That was to argue that rhetoric would be useful in understanding science. You would have to crack that hard nut of the internal rhetoric of science. And so I did that just along with everyone else. But now I'm really more interested in the public discourse of science. I think the rhetoric of science as a subfield is going strong. There's really no need anymore to be making an argument for its worthiness. So what's really interesting to me right now is the public ethos of science. Scientists, I think, in our culture are seen both as cultural heroes and also as elitist geeks, right? They're simultaneously admired and despised in contemporary culture. And so I'm really interested in studying how they're portrayed in public discourse, both in their own public address and in the public address of others. I've also really lately been interested in troubling the boundary between technical and public spheres. It seems to me there's been a lot of work done lately on citizen science, where non-scientists participate in the doing of science by developing some level of non-credentialed expertise or utilizing their experiential knowledge. I think that's really good work. It's very important, but I think that we also need to do some work on the opposite, scientists as citizens. I think when the scientists and the public are defined as separate groups, a category mistake is being made, right? Because scientists are members of the public. You don't sign away your citizenship rights as soon as you get your PhD. I think scientists are often afraid to have their voice heard in the public because they're told that their job is to be strictly honest brokers, right? Just the facts, ma'am. You need to just present the evidence and then let the rest of the public deliberate to make policy decisions. And I think that's a view that's really unfair to the scientists because they're members of that larger public too. And not only that, but they're actually members of that larger public with special knowledge that might be valuable in when deliberation is being done on cases where scientific evidence is really important to that public debate. So I really think scientists need to start thinking of it as their responsibility to engage in public debate. And that's where some of my work has been going lately.
Yeah, no, I've definitely seen that some of your manufactured scientific controversy definitely is one place where you've been talking about that and your articles in Freud. And then, well, along those lines, that I really want to get into that in the last question for you, because I think that's really interesting. But in your second book, you talk a lot about bioprospecting and biopiracy. or concepts, and they seem to have parallels to the work that Naomi Klein is doing in This Changes Everything, this idea that science will go out there and mine for answers. Would you mind kind of explaining how you came to bioprospecting and biopiracy as concepts?
Yeah, sure. Well, bioprospecting is a word that E.O. Wilson uses in his 2002 book, Future of Life. And that was one of the books that I analyzed in my latest book. Wilson used that idea, bioprospecting used that term to try and get scientists excited about undertaking a taxonomic study of the Amazon rainforest. Right, the idea, as he presented it, was to prospect the hidden gems of undiscovered species of insects or plants with certain potential pharmacological properties. And that was really kind of a thrilling argument for his audience, or at least that's the way he presented it. If you think of his audience as being North American readers who dream of striking it rich by undertaking a study of biodiversity. The problem, of course, is that people who live in the Amazon rainforest, or near it, either the indigenous groups or Brazilian nationals who claim that rainforest for their own, they didn't so much like the idea of scientists from the US thinking of themselves as entering the rainforest as bioprospectors. They really saw that as being a type of biopiracy, as they called it, analogous to the rape and plunder of resources that's so common in the history of white man's travels to frontier lands that are often treated as uninhabited, even though they are inhabited, that are treated as ripe for exploration and exploitation. So I think that really resonates with some of what Naomi Klein has been saying, that metaphor of bioprospecting reveals the capitalist mindset that we really need to change if we want to survive the climate disaster that is facing us. And the funny thing is, I think Wilson would agree that we need to change that mindset. In his book, there's a point where he talks about the concept of wilderness as a frontier region waiting to be rolled back is a concept that was, most firmly developed in the United States. In the early years of the United States, and he says that mindset is facilitating the great extinction spasm that we're experiencing on this planet. And yet, oddly, he keeps using that metaphor of bioprospecting and other metaphors of frontier conquest. And I think what's happening is he just can't help it, right? He's caught in that capitalist mindset. Where the only way to place some sort of value on biodiversity is by comparing it to gold and riches that should be exploited. So I think that getting out of that mindset is a really hard thing. Recognizing how the language we use replicates that kind of mindset is one step towards doing that.
Wow, and that ties in really nicely with Klein's work. And I think you did a great job of explaining parallels that we're seeing today in contemporary environmental policy debates. And then I really, kind of at the end of all of this, you've done a great job of explaining your trajectory, and some of the stuff you've done is, but you talked about moving towards a new role of scientists and a new role of the public in science. But also, I'm really interested in, too, what do you think the role of the rhetorical critic in science is moving forward? I mean, we have the work of Walsh and Graham and Herndl and yourself. So where do you see rhetorical critics functioning in this public technical sphere debate going forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think rhetoric of science has, for a long time, really seen itself as taking a stance towards science that challenges the science. You could say that, just by claiming that science is rhetorical, we've embraced the sophistic impulse to critically challenge science as something other than what it claims to be. And I think that kind of work is important, and I think that kind of work needs to continue. Science does need to be taken down a notch or two every once in a while. But what I've been arguing lately is that I think at least some rhetoricians need to take what I've been calling an Isocratean stance towards the rhetoric of science, right? Isocrates rejected Plato's belief in an absolute truth, but he also rejected Gorgias's belief in relativism. He argued instead for the development of a pedagogy that reflects and manifests civic virtue by developing the character of his students. So rather than critique scientific rhetoric as false or celebrate rhetoric as constitutive of science, I think he would have us teach scientists to engage in public life as good citizens. To do that, I think what rhetoricians of science need to do is present our work as public scholarship. We need to share our most important work with our most empowered audience, in this case, scientists. I think we need to help scientists improve their public rhetoric. And that's, of course, what I tried to do with my work on the argumentative dynamics of manufactureversy or manufactured scientific controversy, trying to help scientists, especially climate scientists, recognize what's going on when there really isn't significant scientific controversy or controversy within the scientific community about some matter, but special interest groups are characterizing the science as undergoing quite a bit of debate and conflict within the scientific community, representing that to the public, right? That's a really hard strategy, rhetorical tactic that scientists, when scientists face that in public debate, they just have a hard time figuring out how to respond to it. And so some of my work has been trying to give them ideas about how to make a persuasive case when they face manufactureversies over things like climate science in public debate. I think this is the kind of work that rhetoricians of science, at least some rhetoricians of science, should continue to do. That's what I'm interested in doing right now.
So then, just as a follow-up, do you find yourself working in communities outside of the normal rhetorical critic sphere, going to conferences beyond English and rhetoric and communications?
Yeah, I've done a little bit of this. I've been asked to present at a conference on epidemiology. I've presented some of my work in other departments on my campus. For me, the public scholarship too has come in the form of editorials. So I wrote an editorial on manufactured scientific controversy for a blog that's read by scientists, Science Progress, as well as for my local newspaper. And I did the same thing when my book came out. I wrote an editorial in my local newspaper on the frontier of science and how we should really try to recognize what that language is doing to our mindset, or how it's perpetuating a certain mindset. So those are some of the ways that I've been doing it. But then I also think that one way that we often don't talk about our engagement, but really we do so much of it, is in our classroom, right? So when I teach undergraduates, some of those undergraduates will go on to become scientists. And if I can help them think through how to be a good citizen as well as be a good scientist, then I think I'm doing my job.
Nice, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I know you're busy and the end of the term's coming up, so I don't want to take up too much. But thanks so much for your responses and your time, and we look forward to having you in Reno in February.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.